And Wisconsin, part of our packed lunch series this week, all around the Packers mandatory mini camps. I'm Gabe Neitzel, joined from the Ike Packers podcast, among a number of Ike podcasts they have around Wisconsin sports. He is Alex Eichstaedt. Alex, so happy to have you back. I know you're pretty pumped for football season coming up. You're pumped for the Green Bay Packers, even though we're just in the middle of June.
Yep, I like to call it hype season. Gabe, thanks for having me back on the podcast and the show. Really happy to talk about the Packers. But reason I call it hype season is because there's so much excitement around the team this time of year, right? New players coming in, looks at rookies, looks at the first time new quarterback Jordan Love under center. I'm just excited about what this team can offer. And a lot of players will get the flexibility to play freely this year. So should make for, some exciting football too for Packers fans. So I'm excited to dive in. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I think where we have to start is kind of the biggest news, at least out of yesterday with the mandatory minicamp with player availability, was Jaire Alexander. And Jaire was not present for the OTAs previous to the mandatory minicamp. And he's going to end up missing out on a $700,000 workout bonus that was in his contract. But had a strange explanation, I guess, where he was in Green Bay from the end of the regular season all the way to the start of the mini camps, bounced for the OTAs, and then came back for this, and he's going to be in Green Bay the rest of the offseason leading into training camp, saying that he likes to get work done on his own. It's not like he's, not, doing things, but he's still missing out on a $700,000 bonus, said that it would take a $10 million bonus for him to get there. It just seemed like to me, Alex, as much as Packer fans love Jaire, a lot of the comments he kind of made yesterday, a little tone deaf. I don't think fans want to hear that $700,000 isn't enough for you to show up to team offseason workouts.
I was blown away by that, Gabe. And I'm someone that would have showed up for, a severe fraction of that, right? And I think more so than anything, this is an opportunity to become a next level leader of the Packers, right? Aaron Rodgers, de facto leader for the last 10, 15 years. Now comes an opportunity. Is it going to be Jordan Love year one? I think he's going to kind of let some vets do that. So Jaire Alexander was the default number one player on this roster. Aaron Jones, you could argue, on the offensive side. And for Jaire to kind of skip the offseason workouts, I'm okay with him doing his own thing and being great. It's like, Jaire, you can do that any other time, but set a good tone, right? Be the leader, kind of, even if you don't want to go or if you want, some flexibility with your workouts. Think about the greater good for the team. This is kind of a time to come together, build some camaraderie in a good way. I thought the boat party that went on a few weeks ago, if you're not familiar with this, some of the Packers players went on a boat party over Memorial Day weekend. I thought maybe that it was a good attempt to try and build chemistry, but didn't necessarily do it the right way I would have gone about it. And so, mandatory camp, you want to see everyone showing up with excitement, and to not necessarily have your number one guy on the roster. I understand the frustration there. I was frustrated with that and a little actually caught off guard because for Jaire, he seems to do a lot of the right stuff, but this is one where I think he kind of miscalculated and maybe just might be tapping too much into his own process. How do you feel?
So I'm not at all concerned like that Jaire is going to show up out of shape in camp or he's not going to be ready to play football. But the issues that I have are the expectations were through the roof for this defense last year, Alex, and they didn't live up to expectations. They finished 17th in yards, 17th in points per game. And a big part of that was miscommunication among the secondary. Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator, was not on the same page as the defensive backs, right? Like Jaire, a couple of times in the media, talking about how he didn't want to play zone, wanted to play more man-to-man. And you saw some of the success he could have late in the season when the Packers boat raced the Vikings and he shut down Justin Jefferson in that second to last game of the year. And it was probably the best game of the year overall, offense, defense, special teams, everything for the Packers.
Interviews.
But, yes, everything. And I would love it. I would love them to try to attempt to get on the same page. And his defensive backs coach isn't there anymore. Jerry Gray left, and they brought in somebody else. I would have just liked to have seen him there for those 3 weeks. And now, again, he's there this week because it's mandatory, and he could get fined if he's not there. But I would have loved to see him there for those 3 weeks just because I don't want them early in the season to still have some of those miscommunications. And look, I mean, to me, some of this is on Joe Barry for not putting his players in a better position to succeed in terms of playing man-to-man versus the amount of zone that he plays. But I just don't want to see those miscommunications early in the season, because you do have a new safety in Jonathan Abrams, who's now going to be, Jonathan. Now I'm blanking on his name. Jonathan Owens, who has come
Jonathan
in,
Owens. Yep.
he could be a starter at safety. Darnell Savage, who was benched for a lot of the miscommunication stuff last year, he's going to be back there at safety. Keyshawn Nixon is going to be getting a really good look at that nickel back. So there are a lot of moving parts in that secondary, and I would like to see them get a little bit more on the same page. Not that these last 3 weeks and Jair being there would have solved all the issues. It just would have been a nice, to me, to kind of start getting everybody on the same page now, so you can continue to build upon that when we hit late July and they're going to training camp and they have the 3 preseason games and the joint practice with the New England Patriots. That's what I would have liked to see. And like you said, we just kind of dealt with Aaron Rodgers not being here the last 2 years, and he was criticized heavily for not coming. And Jair's probably going to be one of the defensive players with a C on his jersey. I would have liked to have seen him there the last 3 weeks.
Well, you brought up the defense last year, kind of dropped the ball. I think expectations just went up for Jair Alexander. This is something people are going to be paying close attention to, just like how Rodgers missed the previous off seasons. It's kind of becoming a culture in a bad way for Green Bay. The stars kind of separating themselves from the rest of the unit. And it makes me almost think of Axl Rose from the band Guns N' Roses.
From GNR. Did not think we'd be getting a GNR reference. I love it.
If you're familiar with Guns N' Roses, Axl Rose used to, ultra talent head, vocalist. He used to not show up for some concerts or show up extremely late. And I'm sure, it didn't help the situation in the band, in the locker room. And I think that's the same case here. I'm not worried about Jair Alexander. Like you said, he is a talent. He has his own way of doing things. He's kind of always been a bit, I don't want to use strange as the word, but just unique. He's unique.
He's brash. He's outspoken. And I think that's just part of who he is, right? I think that's part of why he's been successful in the NFL, making the transition out of Louisville. That's why he's been so good for 6 years.
And he's got the confidence, right? I'm sure Jair, he brought up the fact that he's been a Pro Bowler twice. He's been in All Pro twice. But man, how about the year that you got a lead on the defense? No longer is Aaron Rodgers here to carry you. And I think this is going to be a make or break year for a lot of Packers players, a lot of players who were paid large amounts of money during the success of Aaron Rodgers. Well, now he's gone. Maybe he, took care of some of the mistakes for the team. And how are they going to do when they have the spotlight, when they have those big dollar numbers next to their name, and there is no Rodgers to kind of take that blame for him? Kind of like when Ryan Braun retired, and also in Christian Yelich, he became the target for a lot of Brewers fans and baseball fans. Now there's no more Aaron Rodgers to kind of take that deflection, that blame. So I would have loved to see Jair there, but I'm still confident he can be a top tier player in this league.
Yeah, he's like you said, and I said, I have zero. I'm not going to have any confidence issues within Jair Alexander. I expect him to play well. And when I look at this defense, Alex, going back to last year and the expectations that were set on them, top 5, top 10 defense, didn't live up to it. And yeah, they have a lot of talent, but outside of Jair Alexander, I see a lot of ifs when you start going up and down the depth chart. Like this defense could be good if Kenny Clark kind of regains form. If TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt can step up and prove that they can be good rotational players, good starters within the Packers defense. If Quay Walker continues to grow and leaves some of the hot-headedness of pushing coaches on sidelines, it kind of finds a way to play, fast, but not get reckless. If Devondre Campbell can get back to the level he was 2 years ago. If Rashawn Gary is healthy, it's just up and down. It's if. Jair's the only one I don't have an if next to.
Yeah. And you could argue maybe the second guy you wouldn't have is Rasul Douglas, right? The guy who's the other cornerback. And I've seen a lot of discussion about who is CB3 on this roster. Is it going to be Eric Stokes? Is it going to be Keyshawn Nixon? And when you have a couple of players trying to, compete for that final spot in the cornerback rotation, I think you want to have Jair there to also get his opinion on it, right? This is a leader. He's going to be out there every play, every snap, hopefully. And maybe he has some thoughts about who he'd rather have on the inside with him. And these are just some of these questions that get answered when you spend that extra time over the summer. I feel quite, happy about the offense on the other side, where you see Jordan Love out there playing with Aaron Jones, getting warmed up, throwing with Romeo Dobbs. I think that's going to work out some of those chemistry kinks of communication, those smaller things that kind of, get swept under the rug in the offseason, but they're super important for a team.
Yeah, especially a young team the way the Packers are. When it comes to that third cornerback spot, it seems like they're going to give Keyshawn Nixon every opportunity because it seems like they've experimented with different guys on the slot, and I think they've just
Mhm.
kind of gotten themselves in a position where quite possibly their top three corners of Stokes, Razul, and Jair are all better on the perimeter, and they want those guys on the perimeter. Maybe you see in a dime situation when you want that extra, four quarterbacks on the field. Maybe you
Mhm.
see Jair slide more to the inside, and Eric Stokes, presuming he's healthy, you see him come in and play the boundary. But they experimented with Razul in the slot last year, didn't really work out, and I guess that's where I have more hope for this upcoming year for Rasul Douglas to try to
Mhm.
regain the form that he had 2 seasons ago. Not that I think he's going to, have 5 interceptions and return two of them for, interception, two of those picks for touchdowns. But I think he
Yeah.
can get back to being that solid player because he's going to be more on the outside where he's set to be more successful. The same thing with Jair. And that's why they're going to give Keyshawn Nixon every opportunity to be that nickelback.
Keyshawn Nixon coming back, I think, is so big for the Packers, right? You have a season where, you struggled to get offense when you had Aaron Rodgers because of young receiver growing pains. So you have Keyshawn Nixon, free agent. When he came back to Green Bay, I was electric because he's going to make some plays on special teams that'll give better field position. And he's one of those players where if he gets the ball in his hands on defense, that might be a house call, kind of similar to Charles Woodson, how he was always looking end zone because of those kick returning days in college when he was at Michigan, taking it in the house, playing a little offense. Keyshawn Nixon has those ball skills that can really translate to defense when he gets that ball in his hand. I'm excited for what he can do. Another player who I think will help out just the overall secondary is actually first round pick Lucas Van Ness. When you add another defensive end in there who is a big player who can play in the trenches, who can also rush the quarterback, I think the pressure numbers and the sacks are just going to go up on Green Bay. This is probably what Goot's thinking. And that will, create more opportunities for guys like Douglas, Jair, and Keyshawn to make plays on the ball in the secondary. Hopefully the safety situation gets sorted out soon. That's a position group I have my eyes on.
Yeah, well, I know you're excited for Lucas Van Ness because that was the
Mhm.
player you predicted for the Packers to take. So you got to
Yep.
take your victory lap on that one, predicting that's the guy. But the thing about the defense that I'm excited for, but
Mhm.
then I have a little apprehension towards as well is the amount of versatility I think some guys have. You brought up Van Ness. I think on passing downs, when you have those obvious passing situations, I think you could see him kind of slide to an interior position and still be able to rush the passer and have Gary and Preston Smith on the outside. I think that, and the Packers have more or less, without saying it and confirming it with Quay Walker, they're looking for more ways to get him to rush the passer and get after the quarterback. I think
I
they
like
have some
that.
players that have versatility. I'm a little concerned about the defensive coordinator and whether or not Joe Barry can put them in those creative spots and try to kind of go outside of the bend but don't break. This is the way we run our defense type of mentality he's had the first 2 years and see if he can get creative with some of those guys that have the versatility. So I have excitement, but then apprehension all at the same time. It's very complicated.
Well, you brought up a player that I have my eye specifically on in terms of Joe Barry, and that is Kenny Clark. This defensive tackle for the Packers has, the most potential, arguably, of any defensive lineman in the division. Yet, for some reason, it's like Kenny just can't realize it. He can't take that next step. And that's where you're hoping a defensive coordinator that you retain after a pretty, underwhelming season. Maybe he could have been let go. I was in that camp. I'm
You
okay with
weren't
him
alone.
getting no, and I wasn't alone. So Packers fans, I was right there with you. But Joe Barry has to find a way to get more sacks out of Kenny Clark because he's making a boatload of money, and I'm okay with, having a big guy down there make the money, but he has to be producing in terms of sacks. This Packers team has to get more pressure on the quarterback. Rashawn Gary is no longer a guarantee to come back and produce the way he was before his injury. He's kind of an unknown. I'm with you. I feel a lot of unknowns around this team this year. I think that's just a general state. And it's okay. It's a growing year, a transitional year, but I also want to see people being held accountable. I think that's Joe Barry. What can you get out of guys like Devondre Campbell? What can you get out of guys like Kenny Clark? He's got tons of talent on defense. I want no excuses from him. And then on the offensive side, Matt LaFleur arguably had his shot with Rodgers and couldn't get it done. Now he has his quarterback of the future, Jordan Love. I think he needs to have some accountability as well. This is your year, man. It's not just a free-for-all year. You can go 4-13 or whatever. I think I need to see some serious growth. He's kind of put a lot of pieces in play to get to this point. This is not just some random year where you went 3-14 last year. This is the Packers. We have a winning culture, and I expect the Packers to win again this season.
Yeah, I guess I'm not expecting them to have a necessarily a winning season, and I'm okay taking a step back because I just think of Brett's first year in 1992. Yeah, they went 9-7, but they weren't a playoff team. I think of Aaron's first year back in 2008. They were 6-10, but there was a young core there that you saw start to grow and you could get excited around, and that's what I'm looking for. Like if they lose a game, 27-24, but Jordan Love is taking those necessary steps forward. Yeah, losing stinks and you would obviously rather win, but I'm just looking for the team to start to trend in the right direction. There's $50 million plus in dead salary cap money, a big chunk of that obviously being the $40 million for Rodgers. There's going to be some dead cap again next year. I just think that these next two seasons, you're trying to start to build up to try to really make an honest run for something in 2025 when maybe you have a little bit more money. You can go out and make a splash in free agency and the way that Gutekunst did in his first year in Green Bay when he went out and got the Smith brothers and he was able to grab Adrian Amos and it was able to get Billy Turner on the offensive line. So once they get that money back, maybe he can go out there and make some of those splashes. But the offense, man, I just don't know what to expect from this offense because Aaron Jones this is probably his last season in Green Bay. He's got a big cap number next year. I'm curious to see how they use him. And without a veteran wide receiver, I think there are going to be some still really growing pains. Christian Watson was fun to watch last year. Romeo Doubs made some good strides last year. But it's still a process. These aren't guys like Justin Jefferson who are A, first-round picks, and B, played in major college systems. We're talking about, FCS players.
Nevada.
Nevada. We're talking about South Dakota State. We're talking about, it's a transition to the NFL, and now you have a new quarterback, and you got to get used to what he's seeing and try to get on the same page as him versus Aaron Rodgers. It just seems like this offense is going to go through some growing pains. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just I want to see I want to come out of this year with like 3 or 4 guys, with Jordan Love being one of them, where I'm going, yep, this young core is going to be a lot of fun to watch them grow.
You could argue it's imperative that Christian Watson has a successful year too, because Romeo Doubs, I really see potential there, but I'm not necessarily sold on it if he's a legitimate wide receiver too. Packers fans, maybe you disagree with me, Gabe, maybe you disagree with me, but we talked about on this last week's show, the Ike Packers podcast, what about DeAndre Hopkins? Is he the player to bring in as a veteran into this wide receiver room to open up space for the tight ends, to open up space for Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and really give Jordan Love kind of like a little bit of a cushion in his first year as a starter? It's important that he's successful. And how do you make him successful? You give him some guys to throw to. Aaron Rodgers struggled with these guys. And frankly, when it got cold, Romeo Doubs, he didn't look like the same player. So I need to see him really make great strides year 2. I love what I'm hearing out of training camps camps so far, OTAs, working with Jordan Love. I think there's a lot of potential there for him to be a great player. I'm not sold. Christian Watson is the only guy I'm really sold on in this receiving and tight end room so far. And so got to feed him. I think he should end up with the most targets, the most catches, and really the most yards and touchdowns on this team, on this offense. Aaron Jones is kind of the de facto number 1 that the Packers will probably try to use. I'm not so sold that he'll be able to deliver, the results that Packers fans are hoping from him. A.J. Dillon, I'm also iffy on. I'm not so sure in how great he'll have a year of. So it's really down to, I believe, in Christian Watson and what can he do to open up this offense underneath for guys like Tucker Kraft, who I'm really high on. We predicted him on the Ike Packers podcast as well, going to Green Bay. Great player, Packers fans. Keep your eye on Tucker Kraft. Great story. I think he can do some damage, as well as Musgrave. He's looking like he could, stretch the field. But it's going to come from, having someone eat up those double teams. And if it's not Christian Watson, maybe you want to consider having it be a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. What are your thoughts on that?
So look, I would love for DeAndre Hopkins to come.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is at this point in his career, he's not really interested in playing with an unknown at quarterback, right? Like, I don't think he wants to play with another young quarterback who's in development. My guess is DeAndre Hopkins could probably go somewhere where he could have a more immediate impact. I'm thinking of places like Baltimore, places like Buffalo, probably a lot of teams in the AFC, since that's apparently where all the good quarterbacks play now outside of Jalen Hurts. Like, that's where all the good quarterbacks are. They're all over in the AFC. Maybe Kansas City wants, a wide receiver one to pair along with Kelsey. I see at this point in his career, him wanting to be somewhere, but I think there's a ton of value in having some sort of veteran receiver, not even necessarily to take a ton of snaps away from the young guys as they continue to develop, but I just want somebody who can be trustworthy and almost be another coach and let these guys know, hey, the coach wants you to run this route at this depth, but if you get bumped at the line of scrimmage, like, it's all about timing. Maybe you have to cut it off here. Hey, when you see the safety starting to cheat over here, this is what you can do. I just want a veteran presence in that room because, again, right now, the oldest player in that wide receiver room is Jeff Cotton, who's bounced around to a couple different practice squads and is now with the Packers. Josiah DeGuara hasn't shown a ton in terms of what he's been able to do as a tight end. He's kind of been more of a fullback, H-back type with the Packers the last couple of seasons. So I just would love to see a veteran wide receiver or tight end, just somebody that can be a leader within those rooms, and you don't have to rely on the leadership of second-year players trying to teach first-year players.
And who better than a former number one receiver in the league in DeAndre Hopkins? He's looking for around 15 million with maybe a few extra million in incentives. Packers have around 16 million from what I saw on Spot Track. I think, Goot's going to let that number come down. He's going to wait it out as he typically does, but it's not a bad player to look at. Another player I want to throw out a name is Will Fuller. He sat out the entire year last year. He may be looking for a job for a comeback season, and he may be significantly less money. Just another guy to have in the room, someone who can, has stretched the field in the past, never really had a tremendous quarterback, playing for, some teams like Houston. And I think Jordan Love offers a lot more than a guy like Kyler Murray. He offers a lot more than some of these other quarterbacks who have more hype. Love has got all the intangibles. That's what makes me so excited about him. He's got the deep throw. He's got the mobility in the pocket. He's got the height, the size. It's really about what can he do? And we don't really necessarily know that, but the things we're hearing so far out of training camp out of OTAs and practice is that they're very, athletic and that he's ready. That's what Aaron Rodgers has even confirmed. So I'm excited. I think people are sleeping on Jordan Love in a little bit of a way because he's such a quiet guy.
Yeah, he really is. Quickly on Will Fuller. I've been out on Will Fuller in the past when like his name's come up with Packers fans. I think for forever, back when they had Devontae Adams, he'd be a good guy to pair Devontae with. Take the top off the defense, be that guy. And he's just had so many injuries that, you couldn't rely on him to be that guy with Devontae. In a season where maybe the expectations aren't as high and you're just looking for that veteran presence, I could be tucked into Will Fuller a lot better because even if he's injured at practice, he can still have a presence and have a leadership role within that wide receiver room. In terms of Jordan Love, what are your expectations for Jordan Love? What do you expect out of a quarterback who's been in the system now for 3 years, but now is getting his first chance at starting?
I expect Jordan Love to be exciting. And this is what I mean by that. I expect him to have games over 300 yards passing. I expect him to have games with 4 touchdowns passing. I expect him to make highlight plays. And I would say in terms of the wins-loss range, I think he's going to fall from 6 to 9. 9 being the high side, most realistically around that 7-8 range when you look at the schedule. It's not the most difficult schedule on the looks right now for the Packers, but I expect him to be very competitive. And where I see him maybe struggling is closing out games, right? If the Packers are winning, does Jordan Love have what it takes to kind of slow down the game and really just, get that W? Those are going to be some of those pains I expect to see with Jordan Love, but he's got a great defense, a lot of veterans on the offensive line. The O-line is going to keep him upright. He's got new weapons. What he doesn't have is a veteran receiver. We're
Mhm.
going back to it because we lost Randall Cobb. Packers lost Alan Lazard. You think about even guys like Sammy Watkins, Devin Funchess. There's always been a bit of a veteran presence in these locker rooms over the last 12 years, going back and forth. And so this year to kind of just roll it out with all youngsters, I'm not so sure that's a great decision because we could be very well staring at week one with no one open, double teams on Christian Watson, and just Aaron Jones getting smoked in the backfield, and that's what I don't want to see for Jordan Love. I want to see some options. I want to see him have a chance to be successful, and I think adding another player really is a necessity here for Green Bay.
I understand this can be a double-edged sword
Mm-hmm.
because then you rely on it too much. But I'd like to see somebody that could develop to be that security blanket for Jordan Love. And it's tough to be that security blanket when the game's still coming at you and you're a little overwhelmed as a young player. Brett Favre had Sterling Sharp. When Aaron Rodgers took over, yes, Greg Jennings, and you had a young core that Rodgers continued to grow with, but Donald Driver was still there.
Yeah, double
Like
D.
he ended up being the all-time leading receiver for the Green Bay Packers. So you still had that veteran that Aaron could rely upon as he grew with some of the younger players. That's what I would like to see. Maybe they wait until training camp, see how things start to progress during training camp, and there's a receiver who gets released, or the Will Fullers of the world are still out there, and you feel like you can bring one of those guys in. I'm just really curious about the decision to just be this young on offense because it's just going to continue to get younger. Like we said, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Jones is back next year just based on his contract and what that number is for next year. Same thing with David Bakhtiari. The way that they restructured his
Yep.
contract, like this is it for David Bakhtiari in Green Bay. So it's only going to continue to get younger, I think, going forward. So having just one person that can help be that veteran leader and help kind of show this team, hey, this is what it takes to kind of take those steps from year one to year two to year three. I think having those veterans, Green Bay certainly has undervalued those at times. I think they could really use one on that offensive side of the ball.
Well, also, Packers fans, let's not forget about the surprise cuts that we see every
Yeah.
year in training camp, right? Josh Sitton, then it was Mike Daniels, right? There may be all of a sudden David Bakhtiari, he's gone, or maybe a player such as AJ Dillon. We propose that maybe. I don't know if it's going to be this year, maybe next year, but there's a lot of players out there who are making decent money with the Packers in a year where they have to kind of prove it. And if they don't have it in the training camp time, I don't, I wouldn't be so shocked if one of these high paid players gets cut to open up some more money for, an offensive weapon or for just another pass rusher. There's also a couple guys out there on the market, such as Jadeveon Clowney. I'm not totally psyched on him, but he bring him in, like he might add a couple sacks if you have the flexibility with the cap and kind of these short-term commitments. I think it's a win situation for Green Bay to, roll the dice with some guys in this year. It's a roll the dice type of year for the entire, organization, moving on from Aaron Rodgers. So the pressure there to at least be respectable, to kind of set it up for that 6 to 9 win season, such as, Rodgers and Brett Favre had before Love. I think it's very crucial on both LaFleur and Gutekunst, more actually than Jordan Love, to have this success, because the defense is the strength of this team. And, you got to give the guy someone to throw to.
The defense should be the strength of this team. I will say that. I don't know if it actually will end up being the strength of the team. I would agree that it should be the strength of the team with some of the talent. But again, there's still so many ifs to me on that side of the ball. There's a lot of ifs on the offensive side of the ball as well. And it just feels like, and the NFL can change overnight in terms of players getting added here and there. But the NFC North itself is in just such an interesting position, Alex, because you have the Bears, who are still in their rebuild. They had a ton of money this year. They're still building it up, trying to get, a better offensive line, more weapons for Justin Fields, and try to figure all those things out. The Lions, I think, are an interesting spot just because, well, everybody's expecting them to take that next step forward. One of their better receivers is going to be out for the first 6 games because he was suspended, and they've got to deal with some of those controversies. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the Minnesota Vikings, I think are rebuilding. I guess are rebuilding because
they're going to have to soon.
Yeah, and I guess if they're not quote unquote rebuilding this year, they're going to have to soon. They have to figure out what they want to do at the quarterback position. So the NFC North is a very interesting transitional period, as the Packers are as well. And this year, early part of next year, if this team can show growth, I don't think it's going to, let's say they finish with 7 wins this year. That's not good enough to win the division. But if they show that growth, I don't think it's going to be that long before we see the Packers once again, where we're used to seeing them on top of the division hosting playoff games.
And that's a great goal, Gabe, right? If I was in the locker room, I'd be saying, hey, guys, I know, there's no Aaron Rodgers in here anymore, but look at our division. The Vikings, the Lions, and the Bears. There is no Kansas City. There is no elite team. The Vikings had a good year last year, but they were a flawed team. I think just the eye test in the game you mentioned earlier in the show where Jair dominated Justin Jefferson showed that, hey, we have a stopper for Justin Jefferson. We don't have to fear this Vikings team anymore if we kind of play to that same
Vikings
strength.
were 13-4 and had a negative point differential on the season.
Hey, what does that tell you?
They were, yes, it was a very flawed team, and they've lost some of their better players. They've gotten rid of Cook, they got rid of Za'Darius. They're listening to deals on Daniel Hunter. Like they're just trying to figure out how to get under the cap. Yes, they've got some really good players, but at the same time, they're kind of going through. I think they're just trying to retool instead of making an outright rebuild.
Yeah,
but they're losing some pretty good players in the process this offseason.
And then you have the Bears, right? The Bears, I'll give them a little bit of credit. They fleeced the Carolina Panthers, in my opinion, for that number 1 overall pick. I don't think Bryce Young's the guy. And so they reloaded in draft picks, but they have kind of a culture of losing, right? You go 3-14, Justin Fields is going to have to snap out of that. He's going to have to turn that program around, that, organization around. That's what I'm afraid of with Jordan Love. I do not want to see his year 1 have 4 wins, 3 wins, 5 wins, because it's really a 2-year test with this guy. The 2nd-year option was picked up, or the 5th-year option for Love, so that he can, have a 2nd year starting. It seems like he'll have 2 years to give this a go, see what he can do as the number 1 guy. And so, hey, the worst thing you can have is a year like Justin Fields, where you're near the top of the draft. And you only have 3-4 wins, and you're thinking about selling off players, blowing it up. I think, with these teams in the division, the Packers can get these wins. I don't see an exceptional defense, not on the Lions. I don't think they had a great draft, drafting a running back out of Bama, top 10, drafting a linebacker in the 1st round. Not necessarily premier positions. I don't believe the Vikings will have the year they did last year in terms of the win total, and the Bears are going to have to still earn it. So that leaves the Packers right there with Jair Alexander, a great defense. I would have loved if he had shown up, but it's like Packers are still, I believe, right there to win that division. Why can't they, right? Like, why can't they, breaking down the rosters? Who's the biggest competition? Is it the Lions?
It's the Lions. I think it's. Yeah. I think everybody's on the Lions. The one thing I will say about the Bears is I've liked a lot of the moves they've made, and that's like the first time in like a decade where I'm like, ooh, Bears are actually making smart decisions. So that's terrifying as a Packers fan. We don't have to spend too much time on that.
Yeah.
But I think everyone's expecting the Lions to kind of take that next step forward because they are that. They're that young team. They can be a fun team. But again, they're number 1 pick from last year. A guy I'm really high on, Jameson Williams, is going to be out for the first 6 games this year. They decided to get rid of Jamal Williams, who led the league in touchdowns last year. Not that he was their stud starting running back, but he certainly played a role on this team. The Lions are getting better. I still have questions about Jared Goff. I think everybody does. I think he's just kind of an average quarterback at this point. He can light you up from time to time, but they're still, they have to take that next step, a step that they haven't taken in a while. I really like the Packers' young roster. I think it has some talent. It just needs to now become seasoned talent, that you need to be able to harness that talent and actually put it into production on the field.
And if we're talking brass tacks, like what are the 2 ways the Packers can actually do this and win the division this year? I think Goot saw this. Number 1, pass rush. Packers need a better pass rush. They got to get after the quarterback. They have to get more sacks. That's going to just lead to, more chances for the offense, more chances for the secondary, which is proven to be pretty strong, a strength of this team, if not the strength of the team. And okay, pass rush, secure Lucas Van Ness. That's a win. And then also, number 2, Jordan Love, right? Keep him healthy. Packers don't have a veteran backup quarterback right now. I don't want to throw it out there, but what happens if Jordan Love, gets banged up a little bit, right? You're gonna need to keep him upright. So Jordan Love You got to do well for him. I think getting those offensive weapons in the draft will certainly help between Musgrave, Kraft, and Reed. But hey, I'm not so sold on the existing. Maybe it would have been better to have a couple more guys still in the roster. Packers are going to have to go out there and make a move still to make sure Love can be successful. But pass rush, quarterback, because Jared Goff is he might be the de facto. Is he the best quarterback in the division? Just out of respect, or are you going to give that to Kirk?
Well, look, I have a long running history of saying Kirk Cousins stinks, so I'm not going to give it to Kirk. That's just me.
I'll give
I
it to
can't.
Kirk. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
if you want to, Alex, I'm not going to stop you. I can't give it to him.
Yeah.
And I think Justin Fields is going to be a really good player. I think he's got a lot of potential. I'm fearful of him as a Packers fan, but he's not. I mean, he's not at the Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins are very interchangeable. I guess I would lean towards Jared Goff just because I feel like every big game Kirk Cousins ends up shrinking, and at least Goff went to a Super Bowl. Granted, he had a great coach and a great cast around him, but those two are very close. To me, they're just very average quarterbacks, and you have an opportunity. To kind of rattle their cages a little bit if you're the Packers fan. If you're the Packers defense, you brought up an interesting point with the backup quarterback situation for the Packers.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not mind to see a veteran be in there, not just because if Jordan Love goes down, how are you going to win games? It's to me about the continual development of the young players on the roster as well. Because if Jordan Love goes out and Danny Etling's going to come in, whoever ends up coming in, they're going to be young, and it could stunt the development of the two tight ends you just drafted, of the young wide receivers that you have. If you at least have a veteran presence in there that can run, at least the basic part of the offense, those young receivers and that young talent that you have, they can continue to develop, even if Jordan Love happens to miss 2, 3, 4 games, if he ends up, hopefully he doesn't, with an injury.
And the thing I think that you brought up about Justin Fields is just why he's a threat to Packers, in the division, is we got to see him at Ohio State and what he could do with leadership, kind of as the de facto guy for an Ohio State team. He looked good. I think, in general, I feel quite safe drafting him too if I was Chicago. But on the flip side, he is not a premier thrower of the ball. He's a run-first quarterback. I think that's still his strength. And so there's some limitations there that Jordan Love just doesn't have. Jordan Love has the arm. He has the strength. And we just don't know his style yet. Is he a gunslinger like Brett Favre? Is he kind of a more conservative passer like Aaron Rodgers? Or is he a guy that's great outside the pocket? We don't know this yet because we haven't really seen enough game action. He's looked decent. I think that's where, the question mark is. The Packers are the question mark in the division, but what we do know is there is really no Super Bowl contender out in the division.
There's no Super Bowl contender in the division.
No.
Somebody has to win the division.
Yeah.
But, the Vikings were the only team that went to the playoffs last year, and they lost at home to the Giants. I don't think nobody in this division is striking fear in anybody else in the NFC. I think you have the two teams at the top with the Niners and the Eagles. I'd probably put the Cowboys at number 3 if I'm power ranking them, and then a bunch of teams that are going to have to try to battle it out for the final 4 spots, including the divisional winner out of the NFC South and the NFC North. Both those divisions not very good, and the Packers fortunately playing the NFC South this year.
Well, you looked at what the Eagles did in the draft, right? They drafted 2 more guys out of Georgia to add to their defensive pass rush. Nolan Smith and I believe Walker, maybe arguably the top overall defensive prospect, had a few issues, but they understand the strength in a good defensive pass rush and a good D line. Brian Gutekunst seems to be figuring this out. I'm just concerned is if he's hitting on the right guys. Kenny Clark is one of these ifs that you mentioned. If Kenny Clark has 8+ sacks, the Packers will win the division. If Kenny Clark gets anywhere near 10 sacks, Packers will win the division. That's kind of like a great goal for him. And if Quay Walker gets 5+ sacks, that's going to be huge for the team. If Lucas Van Ness can add 5+ sacks, that's going to be more. Rashawn Gary, if he can come back, add some more sacks, that's a way the Packers can really win. I look at the other teams in the division. You mentioned Zadarius Smith. He's now in Cleveland. That's a big, sigh of relief for me because Big Z could just ball.
Mm-hmm.
He could. whether you want to say he was a great leader or not, whatever, but he could ball, he could get the quarterback. And Detroit, they have Hutchinson. I think he's going to make another strong year, but maybe they'll regress after such a, strong year last year. Jamal Williams seemed to ball out of his mind last year. As a Packers fan, just kind of watching him, scored a lot of touchdowns. Maybe they'll regress a little bit. Maybe these wide receiver issues will cause some problems on the offense that people aren't expecting. Maybe they'll just continue to build on it. I'm not so sold, right? It's Detroit. They don't really have the culture for repeating this stuff. And then so if you think about from that, perspective, these if Detroit kind of takes a little bit of a pause, and if the Packers can get those sack numbers, well, then the Packers could be a top 5, top 4 team in the NFC, because frankly, it's just not as strong. I believe people see that at this point.
Alex, where can people find the work that you do with Ike Packers? And I know you talked about it. You kind of teased it earlier. You guys had a great interview with Kraft earlier this offseason. If people want to find that, how can they find that?
Yep. Please subscribe to Ike Packers podcast on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. That's the number one way. Tell a friend about the Ike Packers podcast, because we called Christian Watson last year. We called Lucas Van Ness this year, and we also called Tucker Kraft. So if you want to know who the Packers are getting, what's the latest on the teams, thoughts on the boat party, we're there for you at Ike Packers podcast. Gabe, thanks so much for having me. I always love talking about this team, and it's been a blast. And off season will be over before we know it.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, man. Like, they're going to be hitting, the pads are going to be on at the end of July before we know it. So thank you so much, Alex, for jumping on the Packed Summer Packed Lunch this week. That's Alex Eichstaedt. And again, we'll be back again tomorrow. Perry Goldstein from Pack's What She Said podcast is going to be joining us as we continue to break down the Packers all summer long on Packed Summer here on ESPN.